please take a seat. It's free. If you want to get up, get a drink, get some food during the performance, that's absolutely fine. Just please do so with the minimum of disruption for people around you. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I'm going to tell you a story. It's a true story. But before we do, a quick word on stories. What they are, what they're for. History is just one big story, or rather a series of stories that we've been telling ourselves over and over again. And we keep rewriting it, which is rather interesting. I believe very strongly that an enormous amount of insight can be gained by any given human being in this room by the application of a very simple test. Treat the stories of history like you do the stories of books, or films, or radio plays, or whatever your chosen form of drama is. If you were to apply that same critical faculty that we all possess to the stories of supposedly truth of history, what are the criticisms you would come up with? Just asking that very simple question opens a lot of doors. Let's take an example we'll all be familiar with. Let's talk about slavery. Horrible subject, of course. What is the story of slavery? The story of slavery is that for hundreds of years people were treated as objects, and then men like Abraham Lincoln, for instance, came along and slavery was abolished. A lunacy to claim that, saying that you can abolish slavery is equivalent to saying that you can abolish murder. What's interesting about that story is, doesn't it start really late? Why is it that the main thrust of the narrative takes place at the end of the events? Something to think about. All I'd encourage you to take away from this, hopefully you'll learn about my subject tonight, and hopefully I'll entertain you and inform you, but if I can have you take away any one thing, is please apply your same critical faculties that you apply regularly to fiction, and apply them to what is supposedly truth. The sound of the great intellectual revolution of mankind isn't grand. The sound of it is when you're sitting in the films and a trailer comes on and a voice goes from the back, inevitably, "That looks shit." And then another voice pops up and goes, "I thought it looked all right, actually." That's the sound of the intellectual revolution. You already have it. You already have this capacity. You don't need to work on it. You don't need to spend any time on it. Just take it and apply it to something else. That's enough of that. On to tonight's story. It's a true story. And like all good stories, it starts with a very simple question. Are you sitting comfortably?
Yes.
I'll take that as a yes. We begin as the 13th century, the Common Era, or 13th century AD, as we might say. In China, Ningzong, the emperor of the Song dynasty, is about to usher in a new golden age of technology, culture, into China, one of the oldest empires on earth. He's battling corruption in his own court, but nonetheless, in all likelihood, his reign will be defined by this new golden age that he's trying to usher in. That's what should happen. But something is coming. In Persia, the great Islamic civilization of the day, the emperor, or Shah, Muhammad II, is ruling over an empire which has some of the greatest scientific advances the human race has ever seen. Science, mathematics go hand in hand with Islam at this time. He's got his problems. He's conflicted with the Caliph in Baghdad at this time. But in all likelihood, his reign is going to be defined by scientific revolution. That's what should happen. But something is coming. As far away as Europe, Pope Innocent III is reforming the Catholic Church. He's very concerned with heresy. He's very concerned with the infidel. And he's rapidly organizing a fourth crusade to retake the Holy Land from the Muslims who currently own it. In all likelihood, his papacy is going to be defined by these attacks on heretics and on infidels. And it's going to be defined by his extreme willingness to interfere with the rule of the various princes of Europe. I believe you have a question.
Sorry, could you speak up a little bit?
Yes, please.
Oh, no, apologies. Are you able to hear me better at this volume?
Yeah, I think maybe if we all shuffle forward a little bit.
Okay, here's what's going to happen. We're going to form a horde. We're making you Khan, and you're going to shuffle your way forwards. Okay, advance into Eastern Europe.
Seize my horse.
Avoid India; it's too warm. Please take as long as you need to get comfortable. I don't want anyone uncomfortable during the talk.
There are some seats down here as well.
What color is your shirt, sir?
Green.
All right, we're making you the Green Khan.
Okay.
You're in control of this entire area of the room. Let me know if your people need anything, all right?
I'm working all along, so
I'll just wait for everyone to get seated. Can everyone hear me a bit better?
Yes.
Okay, please. It's fine. Please do let me know if it's... Fair enough. Do just let me know if I'm not speaking loud enough. I can up the volume a bit. Okay?
Sounds so interesting.
Thank you. And where was I? Oh, yes. In all likelihood, the reign of Innocent III is going to be dominated by this war against the heretics, against the infidels, against whoever, by his willingness to intercede in the actions of European princes, as is the right of popes at this time. That's what should be about to happen. Something is coming. To truly understand the impact of what is coming, I would like you all to do something for me. You don't need to be active in it, don't worry. No audience participation necessary. I'd like you all to imagine yourselves in the place of a farmer in this time. It's the 13th century, so there are many farmers. You have heard, unfortunately, that there is something coming towards your land, towards your village, which is to be feared. There are barbarians coming out of the north into your land. They are raiding, they are tearing villages down, they are burning, and they are capturing people. You have heard stories of the man who rules them, some new king who has arisen in the north. They say that he was born of a virgin. His mother had not known the touch of a man when she gave birth to him. He was fathered by the eternal sky itself, a god to these barbarian people. They say that his soldiers can ride on ice, that they can ride on the wind itself. They say that he has with him a great and powerful wizard who can summon thunder and lightning at will to terrify and destroy the enemy. You have only heard of this, you have not seen it. But the knowledge that this horde is coming, for a horde is the name given to a group of these strange barbarians known as Mongols. And so, along with your family, and your animals, and your other possessions, those that you can carry, you flee to the nearest walled city, for it is known that the barbarians have no siege weaponry. They cannot attack a walled city. They are illiterate, filthy, cultureless figures. They may burn your wooden towns, they may take your animals, but a walled city will protect you from them, and eventually they will become bored and they shall leave. So you retreat into the city. You should be safe. You should be able to outlast them. There are stores in the city of food, grain, meat. You should be able to wait for the horde to leave and then return to your life. That is what should happen. But someone is coming. You awake one morning to chaos, the sounds of screaming, sounds of burning buildings. Casting your eyes around, you see that the city is sinking. How can a city be sinking that is placed here? There is no river. There is no flood. There is no swamp. And yet the city is sinking. Buildings are burning, people are fleeing for their very lives, and you have no choice but to join them. Leaving the city, you are surrounded by the same barbarians that you had feared, that had driven you in here. Any resistance, any soldiers, anyone who attempts to fight is mown down by a hail of arrows fired with appalling accuracy from these horseback barbarians. You and your family are taken as property, as essentially slaves. Your goods are distributed amongst the conquerors. And in your time in this new camp, perhaps you see something. Perhaps you see a man. He's got grey in his beard. Though he's obviously an older man, he's still heavily muscled, very strong, as are all of his people. He wears a little more finery than most, but not a great deal. He rides a red-grey horse. Perhaps you see him in conversation with what you recognize as an imam, a scholar of the Muslim people. This is strange, as the barbarians are themselves not Muslims. And the imam does not seem to be a captive. He seems to be, if anything, an advisor to the old man. What do you hear when they speak? We'll return to this conversation later. But we need to change perspective because that's all very confusing. What happened to the city? It's very simple. The Mongols, for centuries, a disparate group of clans warring against one another, have been united under a single king. He has been given the name Ghengis Khan. He is the Wolf King. He is the King of Kings. He is the World Conqueror. All of these titles apply even now. And when approaching a walled city, lacking in siege weapons, in order to conquer it, what he has done is ordered his men to take shovels and dig into a nearby river, to redirect the river itself into the city, thus sinking it. This has never been done in all of human history, this level of destruction accomplished by such means. But is he a monster? Or is he something more complex? What would it have been like to live under Ghengis Khan? Well, there's a couple of interesting things to bring up there. Some of his first decrees are very interesting. The abolition of slavery, the abolition of the kidnap of women, known as stealing women, literally in the Mongol translation, and interestingly, the abolition of adultery. All things now punishable by the death penalty. So why? Is this out of morality? Is this because he objects to the idea of slavery? Is this because he was a slave as a child? He was. Getting rid of the kidnapping of women, is this because he objects to this morally? Is this because his mother was kidnapped, because his wife was kidnapped and taken as property? Perhaps. What's interesting to note about these reforms is that they also allow a great deal of cohesion. If you're not taking anyone's sons as slaves, they have no reason to kill you. If you're not stealing people's wives and daughters, they have no reason to kill you. If adultery is not taking place, there is no reason for the jealousy that breeds. It's very easy to look at these reforms and see him as a good man. I would argue it's perhaps easier to just see him as a pragmatist who was trying to accomplish something no one has tried to accomplish for quite some time, not since the death of Alexander. He was creating an army that the world had never seen before, the like of which the world had never seen before, with the express intended purpose of conquering the earth itself. So, of course, the more pragmatic reforms were the ones that he went for. We need to define a few things. We need to define what slavery is, and we need to define what adultery is, because the Mongols do not have the same definition that we might expect. It was not possible to take a foreigner as a slave, in the sense of the word. So by abolishing slavery, you may not enslave a Mongol, you may not enslave a Tartar, or any of the people of the Felt Walls, as they were known, that he has united. But an Indian, a Persian, a European, that's all fair game. Suddenly the abolition of slavery starts to look a little bit less moral. By adultery, we mean only sleeping with someone from another household, not sleeping outside your own marriage. This is about stopping conflict. This isn't about morality. Or maybe it is. I'll leave that up to you. Cohesion and morality are not mutually exclusive concepts. So what you choose to believe was driving him is entirely up to yourselves, since we will never know the mind of a man dead so many centuries. As he has drawn this new nation together, his stated purpose, as I said, is to conquer the earth itself. This is for two reasons. One is simply money. He had learned, along with the rest of the Mongols, very poor people, that by invading other peoples, particularly the Tartars, and taking their goods, they could vastly increase their own wealth. Thus, by conquering the earth itself, surely you'll become the richest people imaginable. At the same time, he seems to have strongly believed that the reforms he was introducing were for the best, morally speaking, for the best. So maybe he was just trying to make the world a better place. Again, I leave that up to you. Perhaps he is just valuing his own people over others. Perhaps he's trying to make the best world for the Mongols at the subjugation of other peoples. Or perhaps he is genuinely trying to make the world a better place for everyone. How can we know? He's also introduced a heavily meritocratic system into the way the Mongols work. What defines your job is no longer who you're related to, it's no longer who you're descended from, as it had been. It's your merits. What are you good at? Well, that's what you can do. Are you better than that guy? Well, you'll get promoted. Doesn't matter who your father was. Doesn't matter who your mother was. It's all about ability now. To emphasize this, he actually gave members of his own family much smaller, well, significantly smaller amounts of soldiers and goods to go about their daily lives with, to make this point clear. This meritocratic system worked in a system of tens. 10 people ruled by one. Of that one, 10 more, so on and so on and so on, all the way up to him, the supreme leader and the Supreme Court of Appeal for the system. He's also revolutionized the idea of hostage-taking. A general or a commander in his army will have one of his children, one of his sons, taken from him, for you cannot become a general without one. Now, when the Europeans took hostages at this time, the reason was very simple. If you betray us, we kill your child. Pretty good motivation. Ghengis Khan did not enforce that rule. Instead, whilst his commanders were out leading his armies, their sons were trained to replace them. They were trained to be excellent tacticians, strategists, warriors with bow, horse, axe, sword, and so on. If you betray us, you get replaced. This proved a pretty excellent motivator, especially for a society so concerned with personal honor. So he now has this grand army, the like of which has never been seen, organized with an entirely new system of human management. And what he does with it is expand out in almost every direction. The northern Chinese are the first to fall. The Great Wall they began building in the 7th century is completely ineffectual. It turns out you can go around the sides. Who knew? Thing. They sweep through northern China, conquering 2/3 of what we would call China today, though the borders at the time were a little different. The cities which surrendered to them are treated exceptionally well. There are no massacres, there is no burning. If you surrender, if you become a vassal to this new Mongol empire, you will be fine. But if you resist, you will be utterly destroyed. In addition to this, he has begun spreading word of what his people are doing. Legends of the power of Tengur, his shaman, of the ferocity of his soldiers, of the treatment of prisoners, are deliberately spread by the Mongols themselves to incite fear. A great deal of what you might think of when you think of a Mongol invasion, a Mongol horde, you think of villages burning, you think of children on pikes, you think of all this savagery. This was a deliberately created propaganda image because it's a hell of a lot easier to conquer a city when no one's fighting. That said, they could be extremely brutal to those who resisted their conquest. And illiterate people, the Mongols. That's going to make things very difficult running an empire of this size. And so Genghis Khan commissions a language to be made. This is rather an unusual language. It's composed of letters, as opposed to characters in the Chinese style, but it's written from top to bottom, as opposed to left to right. Now, not many people in the immediate generations will become literate, but enough do that this will allow for organization on a large scale. There's also the importance of song. If you're riding large distances, it's very common to sing for entertainment. And so he incorporated this into the way that he was running his government and his people. The laws were made into songs that you could sing. Military orders could be turned into verses and familiar songs. By the time you reach your destination, every man in the group has sung the song so often. They not only know the law, the punishments, what you can and cannot do, but they know what they need to do when they get where they're going. A lot of this is very simple, but a lot of it is absolutely ingenious at the same time. This is someone who is viewed as an illiterate, divided, highly violent people, and has devised a way to turn them into a heavily organized, well-regimented military killing machine with which to perform his stated goal, the conquest of the earth itself. Then there's the issue of weapons. The Mongols fought on horseback. They fought with bows. When I got up close, they could fight with swords or axes or spears. But they were coming across cities, things they had not had to fight before. Initially, this technique of diverting a river could destroy an entire city, but it will not be capturable after that. It will be a bog with bricks in it. So again, not slaughtering those who surrender. They take Chinese engineers, pay them extremely well to devise siege weapons for the Mongol army. Someone's phone is going.
I'm sorry.
You all right?
I'm better. I'm so sorry.
That's fine. Because I would like to point out that in the Mongolian Empire, that would have been a death penalty offense. So I'm just going to... I mean, I'll let you off this time, but, you know, I do have a sword. I have an axe back here. What's that?
I might die of embarrassment. Does that count?
Yeah, probably.
If I just sort of kill
That'll be fine. We'll claim the spirit in the sky did it to you, and it'll be my holy will. It'll be a whole thing.
Sweet, cool.
No, that
We're all
works.
agreed then.
That works.
I'm okay.
It's fine. You okay, though?
I've gathered myself, yes.
Okay. It's fine. Honestly, it's fine. It's also worth considering the nature of the Mongols themselves as people, as humans. Most of the people they're attacking in northern China are farmers, so they eat a very vegetable-based or grain-based diet. The Mongols live on a very high meat diet, what the bodybuilders amongst us now call high protein. They have a method of cooking steak, which is to take it and place it between two sheets of cloth, then lay it under a horse's saddle in the morning. The heat of the rider's body, the friction and the heat of the horse's body will, by evening, have cooked the steak. There's no need for fire. In fact, there's no need to stop riding in order to eat dinner. A very substantial dinner. It's a small thing, but maybe an army fed on steak, on meat, on continuous riding and shooting, versus peasants who have, for the most part, been tilling the land. On a personal level, how many peasant farmers is one Mongol soldier going to be worth? Quite a few. Also, the fact that they fight almost exclusively on horseback puts them at a great advantage over most trained armies. They have no infantry. They have no need of an infantry. Each man is a rider. They can move faster. They can move better even than the cavalry of their opponents, because these are people who almost live on horseback. So when you start to view it in those terms, it's no surprise that the people they encountered did not stand a chance. And so the expansion continued. And with the expansion, the great wealth of the Mongol Empire grew. They would sack cities who opposed them. They would exact tribute from those who gave in. They are becoming one of the most wealthy and powerful empires the human race is ever going to see. This will eventually expand into the single greatest land empire in human history. Let's remember. And on the subject of horses, it has a rather unique quality, this empire. It has a capital city which is mobile. The Mongols don't build houses, they don't build cities or towns. They live on horseback, they live in tents. What this meant was that as the empire expanded, and they never stopped this nomadic habit, at least under the rule of Ghengis Khan, there was a capital city, the horde of the great Khan himself, that could move to any place in the empire. It was required tens of thousands of men at a moment's notice, ready to go, ready to move faster than almost anyone else could. This meant the administration was mobile. There was no such thing as the outskirts in terms of Mongolian administration. As such, it was easier to make a large area fall under the control of a small one. This is a problem that would plague many empires based in cities, for instance, Rome. When the Roman Empire had outposts in what they would call Britannia, what we would call slightly further south, they had a limited control over that area, just because of the distance, because of the nature of communication. The Mongol Empire was run from a mobile base. The King of Kings himself could come to your doorstep within a couple of days. So everyone was in a position where they had to obey a very centralized control. The empire grows, and the empire grows, and the empire grows. It conquers everything in its path, all under the guidance of one human being, both a tactical and strategic genius, the man now known as Ghengis Khan. He is feared, but he will not be nearly as feared until a particular series of events takes place. Seeing the Silk Road as an excellent means to make money, he sends emissaries to the Emperor of Persia, Muhammad II, mentioned earlier in the talk. He sends 500 Muslim merchants and a single Mongol. Let's take a step back. Muslim merchants? The Mongols are not a Muslim people. Why does he have Muslim merchants? Because another one of his reforms was religious tolerance, enforceable by the ironically intolerant means of the death penalty. It was against the law to be prejudiced against someone because they were a Muslim, because they were a Christian, because they were a Buddhist, because they were a Hindu, because they worshipped the shamanistic Mongolian religion that Ghengis Khan himself followed. You could not impose your faith on other people, and you could not oppress or subjugate or be in any way prejudiced against them because of their own personal faith. Again, sounds very liberal. Again, it's a fantastic way of stopping civil war. So I leave it up to you as to his motives. In any event, he sends 500 Muslim merchants and a single Mongol to greet the Persians. The governor of the first city they encounter has heard so many terrible stories, those propagandistic baby-burning stories that the Mongols have been spreading, that he panics and captures the entire caravan. Learning of this, Ghengis Khan sends 3 emissaries to the Shah himself, Muhammad II, to ask for peace and to ask for trade. The Shah is so terrified of what the Mongols will come that he has the single Muslim emissary executed, and he has the 2 Mongol emissaries shaved, a ritual humiliation, and sent back to the Mongols. This was intended to frighten them off. Didn't really work, I'll be honest with you. What followed was a war that, even by the standards of the Mongols, was unbearably barbaric. I can talk to you about the individual battles, I can talk to you about how many cities were conquered, I can talk to you about all that, but actually one number will tell you everything you need to know about this fight. 90. Our current estimates say up to and probably quite close to 90% of the Persian population died as a result of this attack. Now, let's be clear. I'm not talking about soldiers. I'm talking about 90% of the entire population, men, women, children, old, young, soldier, scholar, everything, wiped out. We wouldn't kill people that fast until the Song. And it's the 13th century. Is it any surprise that after this the Mongols did not have to write their own propaganda? The fear spread itself. And their wealth grew. Now they had control of the Silk Road. Now they had control of a large amount of Islamic territory that would go on to conquer more in later years. They had control of a chunk of eastern India. They had control of 2/3 of China, Mongolia itself, sections of what we would now call Russia. This is the largest single empire the world has ever seen, controlled by one man in a mobile city, which means that breakaways, civil wars are not going to be a reasonable option. And it's only getting bigger. Imagine being a leader of any country other than Mongolia at this time. Imagine what this would look like. This is the end of days. This is the coming of the apocalypse. But of course it wasn't. Because one thing will always get in the way. For humans. That's the ego. Ghengis Khan knew that he was going to die, as all men do. He hadn't spread the stories about him being fathered by a god. That had happened by hearsay. He knew he was fathered by a man. He knew the man's name. He grew up with him. His name was Yesterday, incidentally. He knew he was going to die, and as he reached his 60s, a very advanced age for this time, and in particular for this people, he tried to make preparations for his own death. He had many sons and many daughters. History is a very misogynist place to live, so we have no idea how many daughters. We actually don't know how many wives he had. We do know he had a great many sons, but only a few were of political significance. The three in particular that are worth knowing are called George, Chagate, and Ogadeh. George is his oldest son. He is by far the closest to his father in ability. Chagate is maybe second in ability. Ogadeh is a moron. Ogadeh is drunk most of the time. Ogadeh is the third son. But there's a problem. George's age. As the eldest son, there is a question over whether his father is Ghengis Khan or the Merkit warriors who kidnapped his wife in the early years of their marriage. This leads his other brothers, in particular Chagate, to question whether George has any right to inherit the throne. Ghengis Khan publicly acknowledged George as his immediate successor, but unfortunately, it was very clear that the other sons would not accept this ruling, and at a family kurultai meeting, it was decided that the succession could not go to George. On the other hand, it could not go to Chagate. So a compromise was made that it would go to Ogadeh. Yes. Oh dear indeed, sir. The third son, the drunk, the idiot, was the one who would inherit the throne of the King of Kings upon his death, due to a fight between George and Chagate. He tried to heal that wound. As his wars against the Muslim people continued, he would put George and Chagate in control of divisions of military far away from one another so they could not conflict. In one case, they unfortunately ended up attacking the same city. Chagate believed that George wanted to seize all of the wealth for himself. George was afraid that Chagate meant to keep that wealth from him. Chagate diverted a river, and the city was destroyed in the manner of his father, despite the fact they now had catapults and all the other instruments necessary to actually take the city. This rivalry wasn't going away. But Ghengis Khan never stopped trying to heal this wound. He would say in his later life that he was a master of war, but nothing but an apprentice of peace. This is perhaps the great tragedy of him as a historical figure. He was capable of altering entire civilizations and societies into spreading out and creating the largest empire in human history. Largest land empire, anyway. But he was unable to even cure the simplest of quarrels amongst his sons. One day, in celebration of a great victory, a hunt is organized in celebration. Ghengis Khan will ride a red-grey horse this day. He's 65 years old. He has conquered more of the earth than any human being up until this point by an enormous margin. He makes the conquest of Alexander the Great look like child's play. He has reshaped society. He has formed a deep meritocracy. He has altered civilizations with his passing, and his name is known as fire and blood incarnate by those who have not yet encountered them. He has planned to invade Eastern Europe, to sweep across and take control of all of Europe as the Crusaders are away, trying to take control of the Holy Land, whilst more armies will flood down into their Holy Land through the Muslim Empire. He has made plans to invade India, one of the greatest civilizations in human history, and conquer it entirely. He has plans for a naval invasion of Japan. He is building something. He is trying to create a great legacy, and he is trying to conquer the fucking world. And then he dies. No one kills him. There's no arrow, there's no poison, there's no great battle, there's no honor. Because life doesn't work like that. It's very easy to look at figures like this and try to build these grand dramatic stories, and I've been trying to tell one for the last 2 talks. But life isn't a story. Only history is a story. So one day when out hunting, a red-grey horse will throw the great Khan. He does that. There was one previous talk in this series, and there's one further if you're interested. I hope you've enjoyed this one. But there's a quick moment I want to mention before we end and before I take your questions. Let us return to that farmer I had you inhabit in the early parts of this talk, and the conversation heard between the Khan of Khans and an Imam. The Imam was an advisor and asked Ghengis Khan to reflect on his life, to reflect on what he had achieved, if anything. He was maybe in his early 60s when this conversation took place. So it was very near the end of his life. And he said simply to the Imam, "I will leave a great name after me in this world." The Imam chided the Khan by saying that, "Great Khan, you are killing so many people, there may be no one left to remember your name." The Khan became very angered by this response. His reply was simple and enraged and forceful. "Clearly, you do not understand fully. There are many kings in this world and a great many thousands of peoples. And when I am done, they will speak my story and they will write my story and they will remember my name. Ghengis Khan." That's it. Right. Are there any questions? I'm going to take that as a no.
I have one. I heard a story about the body of Ghengis Khan was buried in such secrecy that nobody survived. So,
whether that story is true or apocryphal, we
Where
can't
did
tell.
the story come from?
I heard it from Delhi.
Oh, okay, right.
So
Yeah, it's one of those
the
areas. It's impossible to tell. It makes for a good story, but in all probability, it's not true.
So we don't
There's
know
no way
where.
for sure. We don't have his gravesite, but we know he died. Everyone does, you know. But no, as to the conditions around his burial, that's very ambiguous. Yes, you sir.
And how quickly did the empire shrink back?
Actually, it kept expanding for a bit. It was starting to pull apart at the seams rather than implode, essentially. As I said, there's a third talk in this series, so if you want to come along, you should feel free. But when Ogedei becomes the Khan, the empire quickly begins to fracture. They managed to sweep into some more Islamic territory. They managed to sweep into Europe to a greater degree. They managed to sweep into little bits of India, China. They eventually do try and invade Japan. It doesn't work. The fleet sinks. But essentially his death was the start of the end. It didn't implode, it just pulled itself apart at the seams and eventually fell to pieces. There was something that came very close to civil war between his children and his grandchildren. So
what will happen when Queen Elizabeth II dies?
Well, I believe that Harry's already formed a board.
Which one's tomorrow?
You say that like there's one.
The one who isn't related to any of them.
Oh, right.
Well, as we've just learned, that's not the best basis for succession.
Is it true that there's like sort of 60% of the population is still related to Genghis
Yes.
Khan because he had the whole thing of it's like the ultimate dishonor to look in your children's face and see the person who defeated you. Is that a thing or is that not?
Yes,
it's really cool.
Yes and no. The whole thing of 60% of the Earth's population is related to him is absolutely true. Here's an interesting one. If you're white, it's a much higher percentage because Caucasians are a little more inbred than most ethnic groups. He had so many children that if you just do the maths, you go back one generation, you have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, and so on and so on and so on. If you just work it out by the amount of children he had at the time he was in, relative to the Earth's population, you're more than likely a descendant of this one guy.
Apparently Blue Eyes are Persian. That's where Blue Eyes comes from.
I remember hearing that.
Yes. What you said about the invasion of Japan, I remember there was something about the kamikaze, the divine wind, that was what wiped out that invasion, but I don't really know anything about it.
No, that's an excellent observation. Yeah, the fleet that tried to invade Japan later on didn't get destroyed by the Japanese Navy. It was destroyed by a storm, which you're right was referred to by the Japanese as the kamikaze, which was the divine wind, the thing that saved them from the Mongols, who were still the unstoppable death-machine force at the time, and that, of course, became the name later for the World War II suicide pilots. Are there any other questions? All right, I think. Wait, yeah, go.
You keep raising the question of pragmatism versus morality.
Yes.
And I suspect you don't want to answer it. Do you have an answer to it yourself? Do you have a gut feel of how much was pragmatism and how much was morality? Or whether it was any of them at all?
Okay, I'm just going to repeat the question for the sake of the recording. Was the issue of pragmatism versus reality? And what's that?
Morality.
Morality.
Yeah.
What did you get?
Pragmatism versus morality.
Yes. Pragmatism versus morality. I think that knowing what I do about his early life, knowing that he was a slave, knowing that his mother was kidnapped, his wife was kidnapped, knowing the amount of personal hardship that caused him, this probably did start from a moral place. I obviously can't know. I'm making guesses. But my gut feeling is that this started from a place of morality, and then it just turned out to be very effective. And that's probably what kept him going. I mean, so his behavior as a ruler is unbelievably pragmatic and incredibly intelligent. Almost every law creates great social cohesion or military organization, or in some way helps this effort that he was undertaking. So I think it probably started from a moral place, but I think by the time anyone's calling him Genghis Khan, it's become something entirely more practical and entirely more grand, if that's an appropriate word.
Did he leave? Sorry, he commissioned this language.
Yes.
Do we know of anything that he composed in this language?
Yeah, but it's nothing terribly impressive. The language wasn't created for the sake of poetry. It was created for the sake of giving orders. and recording laws. The Mongolian words for writing and law at the time were actually the same. They're not now, but at the time of this happening, writing and law were the same word. So we know what he composed, but it isn't any great poetry, it isn't any great story. It's, if you do this, I will kill you. Now go here and destroy this city, basically. It's surprisingly unpoetic for such a vast figure in human history. Okay, I think that's everyone.
How successful were the Mongolian people themselves? You know, we've overtaken all these other people. How successful were the Mongolians?
Cool. I'm just going to repeat the question again for the sake of the recording, if that's okay. You're asking about the success of the Mongolian people themselves, whether this was good for them or just good for him. It was pretty good for them. He had a policy of equal distribution of goods from conquered cities and conquered lands. Now, again, you can do the morality pragmatism thing. It could be morality, it could just be, well, everyone deserves an equal share. Or it could be pragmatism of we don't want jealousy of people getting bigger shares. But so the Mongolians are coming out of a very, very poor period in their history at this time, and by the time of his death, they've got a level of wealth at an individual level. Even the poorest Mongols have a level of personal wealth that was far greater than what they previously have even dreamed of, really. So does that answer the question?
Mm-hmm. Did the riders have diverticulitis?
Sorry? Did the riders have what?
Diverticulitis.
I don't know what that is.
They never got off their horses. Right?
I think there's a joke I'm not getting, isn't there?
Stay up here long enough, They never got off their horses, right? So they obviously had problems.
Okay, no, I can answer that, yeah. It worries me that I can. Yes, there are certain medical problems that, for the sake of making this a family-friendly recording, we won't go into detail on. But, she was asking if there were medical consequences to being on horseback for that long.
Like hemorrhoids?
Yes, like hemorrhoids, yes. Can't help but feel the intellectual tone of the evening has just come down. But no, those were, of course it's a problem. If you're going to live on horseback for this much of your life, you're going to experience various interesting medical problems. But the Mongolians have been doing this for centuries. They had medicine that was pretty adept at dealing with these issues. These were very commonplace. This is a civilization that lives on horseback and that lives firing arrows. So problems caused to your shoulder, problems caused to your innards and various other places by living on horseback for so long. This isn't new to the Mongols. They experience these issues, of course, but their shamans and their medicine has adapted to this centuries before, so it wasn't too much of a problem. If it had been, that might have helped the Persians a bit. Not a question I was expecting to get asked, but thank you.
Superb. Thank you very much.
I think that's everyone. So.